Now, without any further delay, let's begin today's event. I would like to introduce your presenter for today, and that is Steve Powers. Steve Powers is an executive with more than 30 years of business and technology management experience, spanning several industries. He has developed multiple lines of business and successfully managed profitability, sales, service delivery, custom application development, technology deployment, IT operations, and IT support for clients and internal operations. He is currently the president and CEO of Redstone Consulting Group, a subsidiary of Redstone Federal Credit Union. Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you, and welcome to today's webinar. We're pleased to be able to talk to you about how we can help to align your resources and make it easier to prepare for the NCUA cybersecurity exam. On today's agenda, we're going to cover somewhat of the background around the NCUA's ACID exam, some steps that we've learned from our credit union and what it takes to prepare successfully, translating that into how you can organize better to succeed, introduce the portal tool we've developed in conjunction with Redstone Federal to help with that effort, do a demonstration, and then take some questions at the end. So what is the ACID exam? If you haven't heard about it, it's the NCUA's new cybersecurity exam. They piloted the approach in 2017, took it live in 2018, and now are rolling it out to smaller institutions starting in 2019. It is very similar to the FFIEC CAT exam, if you're familiar with that. The main difference being, one, the purpose is evaluation rather than self-assessment. Two, it calls for extensive documentation to substantiate answers. If you go through the entire domain maturity level, there are over 530 items that need to be responded to and over 60 document categories. A category, not just a document, where you may have multiple documents that are needed to satisfy the request. When you're done, it pretty much sets up what your risk profile is and your cyber posture, identifies your maturity level, and will show areas for improvement in cybersecurity. Who should worry about it? Well, as I said, in 2017, it was a proof of concept. This year, it's applied to institutions with asset bases of $1 billion and up. Next year, it will move down to approximately $100 million and up in assets. And there's a feeling that in 2020 and beyond, it may begin to touch all credit unions. So it's definitely something that the NCUA is broadening the base to which they apply it and looking to make it comprehensive across all credit unions. Preparing for it successfully comes down to a lot of the normal good stuff of project management. Do need to do some planning. Key is setting your target date for completion of preparations, setting your target maturity level. This is something that's different. You do not have to work all 5 maturity levels up through Innovative. On the domain side, you can choose to target baseline, evolving, intermediate, any of the levels short of Innovative if you choose to. And in fact, the NCUA does recommend targeting baseline until such time as you're pretty solid on the answers on baseline, then moving up the maturity stack to evolving. Once you know your maturity level, you can identify what knowledge you're going to need. This exam looks to get knowledge from human resources, from risk management. It's not solely an IT examination. It's more holistic across the organization, which is why you would want to identify the people that you'll have involved and assign work to them. Once that's done, you can execute. Amounts to distributing work, accumulating the, sorry about that, accumulating the proof documents, and maybe require creating the proof documents as well. Resolving the items, which means responding to them, identifying the proof documents that apply, where to look in them, running it through a review process so that you know that it's the organization's view on how things work, not just the single individual that prepared the answer. And then if you're using Excel to do this, you would need to consolidate the team results into one workbook. Along that way, you certainly would want to track your status, track your schedule adherence, ensure your items go through the process that you've decided was appropriate for them. So if you want 2 stages of review, you want to make sure each item goes through those 2 stages of review. If you want different items to follow different processes, then ensuring that each item follows the process that you want. Reporting's important. Need to track your progress to the end date so that you know and the organization knows how the work is progressing. You want to have visibility to the evolving risk rating and maturity levels and any areas for improvement that come out of the analysis. Finally, it's really an iterative process. Our recommendation is to address the statements one time, assemble and align the documentation. As you do it, go back and reconsider the answers you provided for the statements in light of the supporting documentation. And then allow a broader community to review those responses, which we believe gives the best resolution. So the NCUA has provided an ACIT tool. It's principally designed for their examiner. It's an Excel workbook. It has 11 tabs in it. I'm only showing 6 of them on the screen. Lots of fussy information to fill out, some links back and forth. The interface is somewhat finicky. Assumes you're an Excel expert. More importantly, though, it doesn't handle any of the supporting documentation that's outside the tool. There's no real progress tracking built in, and the information is only visible to those who have access to the workbook and know how to interpret what it's showing them. Those they built this tool principally for their examiners. We're kind of turning it around and giving credit unions visibility to it so that when they're preparing, they know it's based on how they'll be examined. So as I said, Excel isn't the best tool for doing collaborative work. It gets used for that a lot because that's what we all have and know. But it has some shortfalls in this particular aspect. It does not have a document repository where you can assemble the documents and link them to the statements that they're supporting. It's hard to share. I mean, you can put it out on a share, but multiple people using Excel at one time still have some drawbacks. It's not really set up for collaboration. You have to usually call meetings if you're getting people to collaborate around Excel as the platform for preparing your responses. There is no progress tracking built in. It's a manual process of assembling inputs from multiple people. Responsibility you can use in Excel. You can create a column and put names in it. You can color code it for which individual and get one step in the process pretty well documented. It's harder if you've got a multi-step process, especially if you're using different processes and different resources depending on the statements being evaluated. So those are some of the drawbacks to Excel. To resolve that, we have built a tool that we call Simplifying Cat Herding. Kind of gets the resources in line, lets them know where they're headed, and keeps them on track. We built workflow into it, so statements follow the process you want them to. You don't miss any steps. You don't have to go back and check to make sure it's been through the right review processes. We've built in assignments that allow you to make sure everyone knows what their work is, and the work knows which person it's supposed to go to next. The portal design we've used makes it easy for teamwork. You have a simple single view of the information, including the documentation repository. We've built in some collaboration capabilities so that team members can share their thoughts inside the tool, made visible to everybody who has an interest in the item. We've built in some dashboards that keep you on track, both for the individual and for the team. And again, visibility is enhanced because it's a web solution. Everyone who has access to the system can see how the work is progressing, can see how items are being resolved, how the cyber ratings are evolving, and have a good understanding of how things are going. As I said, our system incorporates a workflow into it. It's a 6-step workflow. 3 of the steps are optional to allow smaller institutions to tailor out the intermediate steps and go from edit to pending release if that's their desire, or tailor one out at a time, just whichever ones match the needs of the institution. The outside review step is in there in case an institution wishes to engage an outside resource, such as a league audit practice or an auditing firm for assistance in reviewing and applying industry standards to the answers to the statements. And the process completes when the examiner has used the tool, looked at the items, and felt comfortable with the responses. There are a number of roles defined in the system. They go from editor all the way down through the NCUA examiner. As I said, the reviewer, approver, outside review roles are optional for institutions to select on a grouping by grouping basis. And you can see the key role in there. The approver is usually an executive like the CISO or a VP of IT who's responsible for the preparation of the answers. The oversight role can be risk management, can be internal audit, whomever you really choose as the right resources that want that oversight or the releaser role capability. In the demo, we're going to go through how we assign work to the right individuals, how we know the individual status and the status for the team, how some of the collaboration features work so we can stay aware of what's changing across the team, looking at our evolving risk and maturity states, and finally a little bit of how the individuals would actually action items in the workflow, whether it's an editor creating the responses or a reviewer approving the responses. So I'm going to switch to the demo at this point. And within the demo, I'm first going to log in as an administrator. The reason for that is I just want to show a little bit about how we assign responsibilities for different work items within the workflow. So as the administrator, when you log in, you are the one that controls the configuration of the tool for your institution, basic information about your credit union, logos, kind of important what your target dates are for ending, when you anticipate starting the process. If you have a CAT workbook which you've invested work in, you can upload those answers into the ACIP portal so that you don't lose that work. Finally, I talked about maturity level targeting. The tool allows you to set which maturity level you wish. In this case, it's set for evolving. That's an institution decision on which level of domain maturity they're targeting. So the administrator also controls who has access to the system. He has the ability to define really, I say unlimited, but a practically unlimited number of users in line with how the credit union wants to distribute work across the organization. You can have multiple editors, multiple reviewers, multiple approvers, multiple examiners and releasers are allowed within the system. And the admin creates those accounts and then assigns them to a role, such as editor, approver, oversight. And once individuals are assigned to a role, we've established the user base. Then we can go in and make assignments and identify what work each person will do. So this is the risk profile assignments. You'll see 5 blocks here. That's because the NCUA grouped the risk profile statements into 5 categories. Within each of these categories, you're able to define both who does the work and really what the workflow is. So in this case, for instance, we've defined data center operations for technology and connection types. but if we believed it should be IT support instead, IT support is now responsible for creating those responses. First review, we set it up to be skipped. So in this case of the workflow, this will go straight from the edit to the approver. If we wanted to change that, we would simply select someone who would do the review, like the VP of Information Technology. We have a Chief Information Security Officer assigned to do approval. That's also flexible to whomever happens to be defined for that role. Outside review, we've set league audits, but we can simply skip the step as well. I'm going to go ahead and switch it back at this point. So this process allows you on each grouping to really define your own workflow and define who's responsible for the work in each step of the process. That same model is applied to establishing who's responsible for the domain maturity sections and the documentation sections, of which the NCUA provided 7 instead of 5 for this area. That's really how the assignments work. It's a key aspect of the system. We wanted people to be able to see how we identified what the workflow for each grouping and how we assign people to fulfill the work within those roles. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and connect in now as an approver and go through some of what they see in the tool and how they go about doing work. So each user of the system has their own landing page dashboard view. They have some common elements on them I'd like to cover. Each person who's got a role in the workflow ends up with their own work progress scorecard. You can see that it's stoplighted. Red means you're behind. Green means you're ahead. Yellow would mean you're pretty much on schedule. It identifies, each of the areas, how many items are assigned to you, how many have you finished, where you should be if you're on schedule for today, so it gives you each person a quick understanding of where they stand in completing their assignments. The recent changes allows an individual to see what's happened elsewhere in the system, who's made changes to items. So for instance, if I wanted to see what was going on, item 39 has been promoted to initial review, changed the answer to significant when they did that, and put a comment in saying they had new information as well. They justified it. I had the ability then to dismiss these if I'm comfortable with it. If I think it's something I need to look into, I can flag it. It moves it to my follow-up review category. Also, in alignment with that, an individual has the ability to change, to focus what they view in terms of items. Right now, we've got this person set to look at my items. They could generalize to look at all items in the system, or focus to look at just their items to work. You notice when we focus to just their items to work, it minimizes the number of messages they look at. They would see tied to those elements that are ready for them to work on them. This individual in a higher leadership role also gets an overview graph of how the entire effort is going. It's what's called a burn down chart in the software world. Basically, you're done when you get to 0. So in this case, as of today, we were pending 69% still needed to be approved, 57% still needed to be reviewed, and 45% of the items still needed to be edited. Our target date of the mid-December is pretty much at risk, or the end of December. As you can see, we're probably looking to be about 3 months behind schedule, ending out toward the end of March. This does adjust nightly as work is completed, so that each of these lines will reflect the changes from the previous day when it's brought up. doing some more work on the system would bring certainly the forecast data in. As you can see, we really haven't progressed much in the last couple of weeks, and that's affecting really the forecast of when we'll complete. So that's to help you understand where your team is quickly and easily. We also have a couple of dashboards that have been provided by the NCUA. They show you your domain maturity levels as they are resolved. This one tends to show incomplete most of the time because it requires you to answer all the statements under the domain up through innovative to get beyond complete, get a score or a rating. There is profile one, more relevant, time sensitive. You can see certain risk items have already been resolved even though all the statements are not yet complete. Each of these is, of course, a link out to those sections within the detailed displays. One other view, and this one's much more useful, of the domain maturity. This shows you on a fairly granular level, and again, nicely stoplighted, regarding what work has been addressed, what the result was of it, and so you can see quickly where you stand. One feature of this now shows you based on those items that have achieved approver review, i.e. are toward the end of the workflow. If I wanted to understand what it looked like based on those items that are still in the edit state or beyond states, you can see it's a much more positive picture. More of the items are completed. I can see now where I am baseline, sub-baseline. You've reached evolving in some places. Investigating where an issue is as simple as clicking on the percentage, which then brings up the area in question. I needed to change the view filter because the item that causing the score may not be in that person's work state. In this case, you can see domain item 109 with a no answer is really causing us to be sub-baseline. That may actually be the situation. It just points out where you need to look, and perhaps you can go ahead and resolve the issue. In this case, there's a gap in what they have, and it looks like they've not identified resolving it until 2020, which would leave that particular section as sub-baseline. Certainly a focus area for an individual working on the assessment. So those are what an approver would see in terms of doing their workflow. They basically would go here. Typically, I change this to, what have I got to work? In this case, there's only one item under the risk profile. I can select that item. I can see that it's been resolved as a moderate risk level. I see that there are 3 documents associated with it. And part of my role is approving. I can go and actually look at the documents that are linked. The documents may show comments. We're running 15% turnover because that's one of the aspects that they were looking for. To view the document, we just click through and we're presented with an image of the document. More than one document may be linked to substantiate any item. In this case, we've got the org chart, the job descriptions, and the succession plans that are the key documentation to resolving or to backing up our response. It shows moderate that we have some turnover in key or senior positions. Feature of the system, we keep an audit history, change history for every statement where you can see who has worked it, when they worked it, what they did with that, and how it got there, so who was responsible along the way. It's great if you want to understand how something evolved. Another key feature is we provide you with the validation information that the NCUA is using to tell their examiners how to look at your responses. So in this case, like I said, org charts were called out, succession plans, and basically they identified these 3 document items that they wanted to look at in response to the item, and so we've got those linked to it at this point. So as an approver, then I've looked at the documents that are there. I've looked at our rating of moderate. Basically, I'm going to, if I wanted to approve this item, I would provide a comment for the examiner around its status. Notice we allow 3 different comment field threads. Internal is internal to the credit union only, so free and open discussion. Outside supports linking for outside exam reviewers that you may have hired. And then the examiner comment field is for communications with the examiners only. So if I wanted to, I would just add a quick comment and hit post. That comment then is assigned to this item. You see I did it. It's going to be available to anyone who reviews the examiner thread from this point forward. To approve the item, I would then just hit approve. And of course, it's asking me to provide examiner comments to each of the documents. I'm going to acknowledge that and not go any further in the approval process in the interest of time. If I didn't like the response, I would simply hit reject. That would send it back to the editor for additional work once I've provided a comment on it. For the domains, the process works pretty much the same. Here I have more items ready for review. Go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and reject this one just to demonstrate how it works. So I confirm, the reason for the rejection. That item then moves out of my view and goes back to an editor for them to address the comment. Secondly, this demonstrates the compensating controls. There's a special comment required whenever the response is compensating controls. You can see it right here, how it's captured and emphasized. That also is visible to everyone working the item. It's only editable by the editor and the CISO roles, though, in case that it needs to be modified. What the editor put in needs to be modified. The CISO can choose to edit it, choose to delete it. So that's really how we go about on the domains. On the documents, roughly the same thing. There's an item to review. It's really in relation to the actual supporting documentation. So what you basically see is there's a response to the statement of a yes. There's the document there. In this area, we're also able to see who's linked to or is using that document. So in this case, IRP item 34 is using this to support its response, as is the domain statement 194. Just a way of giving people visibility into how that document's being used. So that's pretty much kind of how the examiner works. I'm going to go ahead and go into as an editor just briefly to show how the content is created. So as an editor, he has his own, as I said, their own landing page. He's got his own work progress gadget. He's doing great on his risk profile. He was assigned 1 and done. Document list, 5 of 6 are done. On the domain side, 24 of 65 are complete. He's seeing his, the changes threads related to the items assigned to him. As a editor, our job is, that one we're done with, just briefly. So you can see it's in initial review. If I had forgotten something or I changed my mind, some new information came to light, as the editor I can recall the statement and go ahead and readdress it, I just basically pick recall, enter the reason, and it comes back and it's now actionable by me as the editor. And you'll notice it's also added to the change history thread. So you can see the comment that was added and the fact that it was recalled. On the change history thread, I could then basically go in and say, I do believe this is moderate now, instead of significant, and submit it. And it goes back to internal review with the updated risk rating. Domains pretty much works similarly. We pick an item here. What's key is I'd like to show how we go about identifying supporting documentation. So, you know, in general, you can open the guide, see how they're going to examine you. You know, they're going to look at the report. Effective of the information security program is really the thing that they're going to look at most. We can then go choose our documentation tree, which allows us to associate the information that is available in the documents with that statement. So if we thought the appropriate thing was to support it with the information security program, simply clicking on the folder item adds that to the linkages. The policy standards and guidelines, if we went in here, perhaps we felt the change management policy was relevant. By clicking just that icon, we select only that file within that document category. Once we've made those associations, we hit submit. And now those documents are linked to supporting evidence. Appropriate then to provide a comment as to how each of these items supports that response. But that's how quickly and easily it is for an editor with the repository in place to link that documentation, to use it to identify how they're going to respond to the statement. So at this point, I've now updated those documents. I believe I'm compliant. I hit submit. And as I said before, I'm asked to comment to those documents so that there's some context as to why they're an appropriate linkage to the item. Finally, on the document side, how do we go about getting the tree assembled? So this person is assigned to 6 items, 5 of which are resolved at this point, 1 of which is still open for edit. You can tell which ones are actionable by the fact that the icons are colored. The pencil, in this case, means this one's ready to be edited. It does have 2 documents associated with it. If I wish to add an additional document, I basically could select Choose Files and be presented with a potential number of documents. I can select multiple, and when I hit Open, after a little bit of time, those documents are added to that category. Important to understand, we store the documents inside of a system called Virtual Strongbox. It's a cloud-based service specifically designed for secure information exchange. A lot of credit unions use it to provide virtual safety deposit boxes to their members. Their technology is patented. It's pretty much first rate on securing the information. So that's what an editor would do to add documents to an item. If they thought those were complete, then they basically would submit, and well, it would submit, and that item moves to initial review. One other thing I'd like to show is the fact that if you want to know who's doing what, you can basically, the initial reviewer is the VP of Risk Management. It shows you for each item, the workflow that item will go through. That's important because items can follow different workflows depending on how you choose to configure them as the administrator. That's pretty much the prepared demonstration. I'd like to open up to questions at this point.
Thank you very much. And we do have a couple of questions in the queue about the demo itself.
Okay.
The first one that I have is, how do I know who is responsible for the next action on any item?
Well, that was the piece I had just demonstrated. You have the ability to go in and view it on an item-by-item basis, or more generally, we track and display the assignments on a category basis, visible across risk, domain, and the documentation assignments. So in both of those ways, an individual can keep track of who's next or who will be involved in the workflow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It looks like we do have one more in queue. This current one is, what browsers does it work with?
Sure. So we support Internet Explorer 11. We support Edge and Chrome. Those are all tested and validated as known working. We believe it would support other browsers because it's fairly standard HTML we use, but they have not been tested.
Wonderful, thank you. And let's see, another question we have in queue is, how do we know our documents are secure?
Well, as I talked through this, we put these documents into Virtual Strongbox, and you can learn more about them on our website or through their website, but they provide a premier level of security for the documentation that we put in there. They can't access it. We can't access it. All of it's fully encrypted in their environment, fully encrypted as it's being transferred back and forth. So the documents are pretty well protected.
Wonderful, thank you. And it looks like we have another in the queue. This question is, can we import our existing completed ACET or CAT into the tool?
You absolutely can support the CAT now. We have a full import capability. Before the end of this year, we're going to expand that to also include importing the ACET document, an ACET workbook. So yes, now to the CAT, yes before the end of the year for the ACET.
Wonderful. And I think as far as questions relating to the demo, that looks like just about everything. I do have a few more questions in the queue just in general. Are we ready for those?
I'd like to go ahead and finish the rest of the presentation and then field those questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I will let attendees know that we will come to those at the end.
Okay. Well, that completes the presentation. I wanted to touch briefly on our roadmap. We're really working with the first release of the tool that implemented all the necessary functionality for processing, creating, and performing the preparation for an exam. The second release is ongoing at this point in time. So far, we've rolled out the CAT import, which came up as a question, the vertical preparation strategy, which allows you to target your domain maturity that you wanted to work to. Several other features coming before the end of the year. A summary board report where you're able to basically push a button at any point, and the tool will spit out a couple of pages of focused information for use with communication to higher executives. The ability to export data from the tool, either in again in a ACET workbook format or a consolidated documentation repository, or results of the CAT import. Basically, just putting in place the data export capabilities. Our third release will add some of the things I think are neat, like user nudging. That's basically monitoring the progress of each user, tracking them to schedule, looking at their activity over the time period, and when it appears like they might be beginning to fall behind, sending out kind of a, hey, you might want to pay attention to this. Why don't you, work these statements? Just the nudging to keep people focused on it, because we know that everyone has a day job beyond preparing for this, and that job is often interrupt-driven. So I think nudging is going to be neat and clever, and help folks a lot to remember and stay on track with preparation. We'll be adding the ability to capture optional documentation, optional meaning documents that you want the NCUA to see as substantiation, but that were not actually called for out explicitly in their documentation request list. In our fourth release, coming towards the mid-2019, we'll be implementing basically prior year views. What that means is you finish a year, we'll archive it. It'll always be available just as it was finished. You can then clone it to start your next year's preparation, so you don't lose any of the work that was performed. We'll be providing a full CAT workbook functionality, including the graphs, so the tool can be used to work on the CAT as well as the ACID if you wished, and have the information flow back and forth between them. We'll be working on a customer premise version to allow a credit union to run it inside their firewall if they chose to, instead of as a SaaS solution. And along with that, we're looking at integrating into OnBase for the documentation repository for the customer premise versions. That's it for the presentation. I'd love to take any other questions that are out there at this point.
Absolutely. We do have a couple of questions in the queue already. I'm just opening them up here. Our first question is, can the ACET be exported, or is the intent for the examiner to log into the tool?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes to both. This is a kind of an evolving situation with the NCUA. There's support in their management for more virtual work, more online work in terms of the examinations. There's been some guidance memos issued, but the reality is that individuals are comfortable working in particular ways. So what we've done is both. In the tool, there is a role for the examiner. They have their own landing pages, the ability to review items in the tool. Also on their landing page, they have the ability to export the contents of the tool into an ACID workbook so that it will create the content that they're familiar with, and they can work from that workbook if that's their preferred methodology. The same is true for the documentation, so only if the credit union approves of them downloading the documentation. Otherwise, for the supporting documentation, they do need to work within the system's constraints. We believe that over time, working online will become the standard practice, but we also think that probably at the end of each exam, they're going to need to publish that workbook anyway for their archival purposes. So yeah, something we grappled with and came up with that, a strategy to move them to the online portion over time, but give them the capability to get it as an offline workbook if they choose to.
Wonderful. The next question that we have from attendees currently is, does the tool allow for trending year-over-year analysis of ACET progress?
Not in this version, no. As we get to Release 4 and we look at the prior year views and the cloning for current year, we will be augmenting the reporting and allow you to do that trending. And we also, will be adding a section we call Improvement Roadmap, which is really kind of highlighting those areas which are most holding the score back the most, so that it's easy in a single snapshot to see where you might want to focus.
Great.
Next question?
Yeah, the next question I have from attendees is, how far in advance should we start preparing for the examination?
Good question. Our philosophy, our organization's philosophy, we think the greatest success is done if the preparation becomes part of your normal work instead of a project where you crash some people on it for a few weeks to get ready. So we advocate starting a minimum of 6 months, in advance of when your examination date is. That allows you to prepare for it over time, more gradually, with less impact to the day-to-day work of the individuals, allows you to pull the expertise in you might need from other aspects of the organization. So we believe a 6-month timeline provides the appropriate amount of lead time to prepare gradually and reach readiness before the exam date.
Wonderful. Our next question that we have from attendees is, what if the NCUA changes the contents of the exam?
It's already happened once, so that's a great question. The answer I have is we built the tool specifically to accommodate changes in the examination. We basically grabbed the core contents of it, the risk profile, the domain, and the documentation categories from the NCUA's workbook, and build the tool, the set of questions to be resolved from that. So should they change it, we're prepared to import it, the updates, and take it live. The one time that they did change it so far, it basically took us a little over a week to adapt to the change, and then we were able to publish out the modified information. So we do anticipate some changes. For instance, they're working on kind of what they call a sub-baseline, or not a sub-baseline, but a lower level of maturity appropriate for the smaller credit unions as they roll this out, so that instead of the 110 questions that are part of the baseline level of maturity under the domains, there might be a significantly fewer number of questions specifically targeted to smaller institutions so that they would achieve maybe an essential level of security without having to put in place all the infrastructure associated with getting to baseline. So that's the answer on that, and to understand this, the tool is also provided as a subscription service, and inside of that subscription service it includes us ensuring that it's updated as the exam changes.
Great. It looks like we do have at least a couple more questions from attendees. The next one I have is, what does the tool cost?
Okay. Well, the tool is, again, provided as a subscription service. The pricing is based on the asset base of the institution. It goes from a low of $2,250 a year for any institution of $100 million and below, up to a high of $15,000 a year for institutions of $2.5 billion and above in assets. And within that range, it scales fairly linearly across the asset base of an institution. If you'd like to know that for your particular institution, just reach out to, in the next slide, you'll see contact information for Jim Bray. He can provide a custom estimate for any institution based on really their asset base.
Wonderful. And it looks like my last question that I have in queue currently is, how quickly can it be ready for my team to use?
Well, we'll get it for you tomorrow if you want. Actually, a good question. It's a multi-tenant system we've built running on cloud services. Activating a new tenant in terms of actual person time takes about 20 minutes. In terms of calendar time, we tend to say it'll take a day to turn a tenant on. Once the tenant is activated, then the administrator for that client also needs to do the work of establishing accounts, making assignments, importing a CAT workbook if there is one. We believe that that process takes another 1 to 2 days, not so much inside the tool, but really outside of the tool, figuring out who's going to be working in the system and what work will be assigned to them. So easily within a week up and running, generally probably 2 to 3 days.
Great. And we do have another question that's come in. How long does it take to implement the tool?
Again, so for, I believe, or I'll assume that implement means the same thing as get it up and running for the individuals. So I think that time estimate is somewhere between 2 to 3 days and a week in total. for us turning it on for a credit union, approximately a day. For the administrator for the credit union, creating accounts, uploading information, making assignments, another 2 to 3 days. And then in terms of actually completing the exam preparation, that's a good question, which is really dependent on how many resources a credit union puts on it, what time frame they establish for resolution, and what priority they give the process in light of their other responsibilities. We've seen folks be able to get ready for this in as short as 2 to 3 months, as long as 6 to 9 months. We believe the 6-month time frame is probably about optimal for planning for preparation to complete the work.
All right, thank you so much. It looks like that's all of the questions I have from attendees at this time. Just a reminder for our attendees, if you'd like to ask a question via the WebEx panel today, you just need to type it into the Q&A panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Just do a quick last call for questions there. And it looks like that's all I have as far as questions go. Steve, do you have any other last comments you want to wrap up with, or any other?
Just briefly, we're the Redstone Consulting Group. You may not have heard of us. We're a CUSO, wholly owned by Redstone Federal Credit Union. Redstone is one of the top 20 credit unions in the country, winner of last year's NCUA Credit Union of the Year. Our role is to really commercialize, disseminate technology that our CU develops to streamline their operations. In doing that, we partner with Redstone, we partner with other financial institutions to solve common industry problems, such as preparing for your cyber exam without creating a lot of chaos in the process. That's really who we are. The last thing I have, if you'd like to reach out to us, reach out to Mr. Bray at that address or phone number. You can visit on our website at redstoneconsultinggroup.org. If you like the content of this webinar, it will be posted on our website by tomorrow, and there are 2 more upcoming in November 29th and December 17th. So if you wanted to have someone else hear this story, understand what the tool can do, another couple of opportunities over the next couple of months. Thank you for coming. I very much appreciated the chance to talk with you, show you what we've been doing, and get your questions on it.
Thank you again to all of our attendees for joining us today. This will conclude today's session. You may now disconnect.